had a wonderful start, but we're just could not be more excited to have you all back to kick off our 2022 now Ocean Colloquium Series. It's an incredible lineup that we have, and thanks again to all of our amazing staff, including Allison Sturgeon, for organizing these events for us that we all get to enjoy. So much happens behind the scenes, as I'm sure you can relate to. And we're kicking it off today, of course, with Prakash, which I could not be more excited about, and looking forward to that discussion very much. And just as a quick reminder too, we're also beginning our research series this Wednesday at noon with Sully, and that's going to be a fantastic discussion too. I'd love to hear the latest from your wonderful field work that's been going on. And as a quick reminder as well, you know, we were hoping to use our newly renovated Tocqueville room. There's some great new technology in there that we can use. But, you know, because of obviously, you know, the current spread of Omicron, we're keeping, as you can tell, largely virtual for the time being, and we'll be reassessing then at spring break. And let's hope, right? Let's hope that we can come back, you know, fully hybrid and hopefully at capacity sooner rather than later. But regardless, could not be more thrilled to welcome you all back. And remind me, Inza, were you going to do the proper introduction for Prakash? Or did you want me to?
Yes, I will.
Oh, great. Please, without further ado, Inza.
Okay, I hope that will be a proper introduction. So Prakash was awarded his PhD in public policy from Indiana University, and actually Lynn was his mentor. To us workshoppers, he's well known, as he called the workshop his academic home for quite a long time. So after some in-house investigation this morning, we came up with the years from 2005 to 2011. Prakash, I hope that's roughly correct. So actually in 2005, that's where we both met here at the workshop, and I also came here the first time as a visiting scholar. He is also a long-standing member of the International Association for the Study of the Commons. So, and in this context, we collaborated quite a bit. We had a joint panel on how to integrate power into institutional analysis already in 2013 at the ISC conference in Japan. And also later at the workshop on the workshop, the WOW 5, we had a panel together on the same issue, which was at that time quite critically debated. And how could scholars that call themselves a workshopper deal so much with power aspects? So, but academic world has evolved since then. So today, Prakash is an associate professor for political science and co-director of the research program on economic and social rights at the Human Rights Institute at the University of Connecticut. You may know he's also author of the book Democracy in the Woods, Environmental Conservation and Social Justice in India. And he just edited a book on climate justice in India, which will come out from Cambridge University Press in the summer. Some of us might have seen his name as a co-author of the Journal of Environmental Politics. And he's also a co-founder of the Climate Justice Network together with Lauren McLean from Bloomington here. He was a member, and I need to read this out, of several working groups. Among others, we picked here for you today the Academic Working Group on the International Governance of Climate Engineering. Then also a member of the Global Expert Group for Scoping of Transformative Change Assessment at the IPBES group, a senior research fellow at the Earth Governance Project, and also a member of the Climate Social Science Network. And he still is an external faculty of the Ostrom Workshop. Both of us, together with Sheila Foster and Gustavo Garcia Lopez, are just about to launch a new working group on power, where you will hear more about in some minutes. Power, Inequality, and Justice in the Commons is its name, and the details about this working group can be already found on the website under the Commons Governance Program. So you are welcome to sign up already. So as it might become obvious now, a major focus of Prakash's research has been on integrating questions of power and inequality within institutional analysis. And to kick off our working group, or revive the power discussion again and give the debates an appropriate home, his colloquium talk today presents a synthesis of his key contributions. And you might have scrolled through the World Development article as a part of a special issue, which he initiated, which was part of that endeavor. So Prakash, floor is yours. We are interested to hear you talk. And there was also a podcast which we announced where you also gave some more hints, but it's not as short as I thought. It's actually an hour podcast. So save some evening time to listen to that. Yeah, please, Prakash, go ahead.
Thank you, Scott, and everyone. It's such an honor and such a pleasant feeling to be in this community again. And as we were chatting pre Zoom, once a workshopper, always a workshopper. So it's like it's this bond that we all share, which is so great to use as a glue for our some challenging discussions. But today, I hope it will be actually more like a celebration of the work of an entire community of scholars that have touched on different aspects of this debate. So even though the original plan was for me to talk a lot about my work and then sort of bring it to the point where we can talk about the new working group, but I thought the more I thought about it, the more it seemed appropriate to sort of make it a more broader conversation. And so I'm actually going to give you a snapshot of many of the key pieces of works that have been done by different workshoppers at different times. And of course, there's a lot of work that we do. So please excuse me if I excluded some of the important works, and I'll try to mention some of the other works that I'll kind of think of right off the top of my head. So with that, let me share my screen. Oops. And if you, at this point, if you want to sort of minimize any of the windows that may obstruct your view of the PowerPoint, please do that, because I did not design the PowerPoint to sort of keep the right corner free. So, and David, I don't know if you may want to do something there so that it's sort of, all the video windows are minimized. So the title is Analytics of Power, Inequality, and Justice in the Bloomington School of Institutional Analysis. As I mentioned, the attempt is to be as broad as I can be, but obviously each one of us have a very different kind of engagement with the Bloomington School. So I think that's, that's obviously understood. The two pictures that you see on the screen here, one is a mural depicting the struggles and the collective work in the Navajo Nation in the times of COVID. And while they're also dealing with many of the other kind of challenges. And the other one is a community garden in Portland, celebrating the collective work and the importance of local collective action for dealing with climate resilience and so forth. So I don't actually have an outline. I'll just start off by sort of recounting this vignette. This is a photo of Skane Farmers Association in Zai, Mozambique. This group of peasants and farmers got together to confront a Chinese mega multinational project in collaboration with Brazil, Japan, and many of the international and multilateral agencies. The Chinese were trying to set up the largest agricultural operation anywhere in the world in this part of Mozambique, of course, assuming a blank slate of sorts where you have poor people who will be willing to work on your land and all of that. but the community got together, they confronted the project, and they established a land trust to sort of govern their own agricultural land. And so, of course, this is the classical workshop territory, thinking about community organization, but thinking about the Chinese land grab and all of the multinational business, we also realize that it's multi-scalar in a mind-boggling way. It's a global capitalism connected right down to the community action and community mobilization, with a sort of political economic bent to it, right? Not just to sort of do just the local collective action, but also to oppose a global project. So this is a big part of the story now. As more and more concern gets sort of centralized and sort of reified in a global sense, Don't Look Up is the perfect example of how climate change is going to be talked about as this kind of massive, global, monolithic, centralized phenomenon, which needs to be dealt with those kinds of centralized interventions. So you know the deal. So to sort of think about conceptually, I think of Bloomington School as being sort of having a number of central features that are unique. One, we have this notion of institutions as rules, norms, and conventions that are widely understood and socially accepted. The rules in use concept makes our understanding of institutions very different from, say, a Hayekian understanding of institutions. Context is extremely important, where we think a lot about bounded rationality and the way in which context, social norms, cultural norms define the rationality and the operationalization of rationality. And in some of the work that we have done, we have also sort of developed this notion of how socio-political context and structures, larger meso and macro scale structures, also create bounds to rationality. So it's not just about cognitive limitations, knowledge limitations, or the local cultural norms, but it is also about the political context becoming a constraint on the ways in which an individual thinks, aspires, acts, and so forth. And then, of course, going back to Lynn's classical work on public goods and higher constitutional choice rules and all of that, we also have a very different understanding of structures compared to, say, the Marxist structural political economy. And finally, I think only Workshop talks about public entrepreneurship in a unique way, which combines public, private, and community institutions to create the public good of public institutions and collective actions and so forth. So in these elements, there are both micro elements of the process, as well as meso and macro elements of the process. And of course, this is such an overarching and broad framework in the spirit of IAD that it's impossible for anyone to do everything. And so, each one of us has picked our own favorite areas within IAD, and we have sort of, tried to develop different parts of the IAD framework. But IAD framework itself, opens possibilities for multi-scale analyses, and then, action situations can be at any level. Right? It's sort of level agnostic in a sense. You can have an action situation between nation states at the global level, and you can have action situations between individuals within a family, which can also be a unit of collective action, right? So IAD itself is both theory agnostic as well as scale agnostic in that sense. Now, a lot of the articles that I'm going to highlight and some of the thoughts that I'm going to share concretized recently when we got together to do this kind of review of inequality in the commons scholarship, which is slightly different from the work that Insa mentioned in the context of integrating power and inequality in institutional analysis. And we thought that even though commons was always in our work, we hadn't directly addressed the commons work. So we did this review, and this was such a productive work along with Pranita, Sheila Foster, and Florian. This is a very reflective piece, and I would invite you to take a look. It's also open access, so it's easily available to everybody and anywhere. Some of the earliest works on bringing in the context of power asymmetries, the inequalities, the community inequalities within communities happened in the early 2000s. And of course, Governing the Commons in 1990 also had several discussions of the power of the bureaucrats and their sort of indispensable role, for example, in the California water governance, where lawyers and bureaucrats and community groups all came together. But sort of explicitly thinking about inequalities within communities started with some of the work that Arun Agrawal and Clark Gibson did with this edited volume. And Insa had this paper early on where she talked about information asymmetries, power asymmetries, and sort of the role of sort of a political administrative culture in facilitating or constraining collective action. And what I really like about this paper is that it explicitly talks about not just the ability of communities to do things which we have always celebrated, but also the constraints that collective action faces in particular kind of political economic settings. Then, of course, we have Florian Clement's work, where she brought in political economic context and the role of discourses at part of the broader context within which institutional action, collective action takes place. This 2011 paper by Mike McGinnis is probably one of the densest papers I've read, and I keep reading it every time I discover something new. But I think my appreciation for this paper has grown over the years. It basically contains a very exhaustive discussion of the ways in which the models of action situation can be expanded and can be sort of embedded within a broader configuration or networks of other kinds of action situations, including policy networks, social settings, and so forth. Now, when it comes to the analytics of power and inequality, this paper doesn't quite focus on those aspects that we have prioritized over the past 10 years or so, but it does provide all of the basic elements, analytical elements that you need. For example, it talks about how socialization processes may affect the calculus of cost-benefit analysis and the way in which individuals make their decisions, which is sort of the essence of the argument that I've been trying to make in a lot of my work. I've also developed the IAD framework to sort of bring in organizations, policymaking processes within action situation. So these are not just context, but if we think about national policymaking processes as the action situation, then do the community groups have access to policymakers? That variable becomes part of the action situation. And that's where many of the powers and counterpowers kind of unfold. And I'm very excited about this forthcoming contribution to the Oxford Handbook of Comparative Environmental Politics, where I've done a comparative US-India environmental justice analysis by looking at the Apache nations in Arizona and and the Central Indian Adivasi communities in India. So of course, I'll share that when it comes, and I hope this sort of is another step towards bridging environmental justice scholarship with workshop scholarship along the lines of Gustavo Garcia Lopez and Sergio Villamar Thomas has been working on the role of social movements in the commons scholarship. And so this kind of is a critical take on some of that work too. The core of what I have been thinking a lot about since my dissertation days is this notion of microfoundations. And here I have sort of wondered how we can think more carefully about the grammar of decision making the ways in which individuals think about their own place in the community, their own ability to make decisions and so forth. And that's where the notion of bounded rationality comes into picture. And we have sort of infused bounded rationality with considerations of power asymmetries, social relations, caste relations, and so forth. One of the early pioneer papers on that is from Adela Slager. And I actually, for a very long time, I hadn't known about this article until I read Inza's article very carefully, and she cites Adela's work on bounded rationality. And I think we ought to be going back to some of these discussions about how to conceptualize bounded rationality. And for this thinking, I think this model of IAD, or this representation of the decision-making process in working together.
Yeah, I'm eating my lunch.
Was that something for me? Okay. This is a very productive way of thinking about it, because it sort of lays out the cognitive environment within which individuals make their decisions. And I have in my dissertation, and I like to cite this because this had the approval of Lynn's own signature on this. And we try to sort of unpack this decision-making process and its relationship with the political economy and power relations, including by engaging with social science theories of power, the three phases of power and so forth. And I continue to build on that work. And I think only with this kind of framework in my mind, I could have actually even been able to put together and hold together a multi-scale, multi-country, multi-temporal dimension analysis of forest and land conflicts in India, Tanzania, and Mexico that was published in 2017 in the book. My favorite piece of my own work is this article, where I argue that individuals act not just in the context of forest management, but when they act in commons, they're also constantly looking sideways and over their shoulders towards leaders who may be influential in other social and political economic arenas. And so that's where I developed the notion of interlinked action arenas. It is different from Mike's notion of adjacent policy networks, because there the focus is on action situation, and my focus is on what I refer to as the microfoundations, or the grammar of decision-making of the individuals. Pranita, so this is just a diagrammatic representation of interlinked action arenas. And here, one important notion is commitment by imperatives. Individuals may commit to collective action not because they have choice, autonomous choice, but because they feel the imperative to commit to a collective action situation. And that I find very productive in thinking about the notion of inequalities within communities and how the apparent outcomes of collective action may actually disguise internal inequalities within communities. So, and you can see how this goes back to the notion of bounded rationality. Pranita and Tom Kuntz have this exciting article on caste, and they built on the notion of interlinked action arena to talk about not just the inequality part, but they also talk about the promises of interlinked action arenas. And that I think, again, is a very productive framework to think about social movement mobilization in the current context of inequalities and climate crisis and so forth. A fantastic review in this IJC paper, where they think about sort of conceptual diversity and how different scholars think about the notion of power. Now, this was the outcome of the working group that Insha mentioned, the working group on integrating power in institutions and institutional analysis. And Gustavo led us in this special issue of the World Development, where many workshoppers contributed. And this article has also attracted attention in the sustainability community. Bill Clark at Harvard cited this as one of the papers that provides a useful way of thinking about power and inequality in the context of sustainability studies too. we have this really exciting tool that we developed in this article, which we call the power matrix. And even within this power matrix, I really like the ideas that we developed as part of co-optation and crafting institutions as measures of counterpower. And these two rows here can only be done through a workshop lens. You know, all of the other discussions of power are borrowed from other bodies of scholarship, but our unique contribution is to think about co-optation is a bridge between power over and power to, which, you know, again, thinking about sort of notion of bounded rationality. So as you see, we, you know, different parts of workshop communities over time has done tremendous amount of work to shine light on the fundamental analytical concepts and tools that we need to think about questions of power, inequality, and justice, and not just in commons, but more broadly speaking, in the context of institutions and institutional development. If I had more time, I would have shared some of the work that Rob Holohan and I've done together in the context of global climate governance, including in the context of global climate geoengineering governance, which is becoming a really heated debate right now. And so what I've tried to do here is to sort of highlight the multifaceted potential that we have as a community to contribute to ongoing debates, not just about local collective action or the, you know, city level collective action, which remains important, but also in terms of, you know, speaking to the broader questions of commoning, something which comes from Sheila Foster's work and some of the other urban commons work that we've been reading, but also in terms of global governance and sort of rethinking and reimagining what it means to promote commons at multi levels in the current context of the environmental climate in the context of inequality, which has been really brought forward by the COVID crisis, which continues to affect all of us. So it is in this context that we present to you the new workshop working group on power, inequality, and justice in the commons. And we hope to be sort of a hub of all different kinds of activities, you know, sort of polycentric hub of different types of activities that workshoppers may embark on in next months and years to come. I'll stop there and we can have a good discussion now. Thank you.
Inza, I think you might be muted. I'm sorry. Just if you were trying to.
Yeah,
that was brilliant though, Prakash.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
I said I just screwed up my Zoom, but I found it again. Thank you, Prakash. Really, that is a really nice focused and at the same time overview of the whole field. So I think many of us will find a spot here and there to add comments or thoughts. I also see Sheila and Gustavo on the call here. Where's he? Maybe he just slipped away. Yeah, so together with this wonderful introduction and the initiative for the working group, I think there might be many questions and thoughts up, and I see already Dan's hand. So why don't we get started? Dan, please, go ahead.
Hi, Prakash. How are you doing? It's great to see you. Sorry we're not all in person at this point, hopefully next year. So my question is about how you're trying to bring power into the IAD framework. And I noticed what you have it coming in from outside. And I'm wondering if there's an advantage to considering it as an exogenous variable that way, rather than trying to endogenize it to the model by making it a function of community attributes.
That's a great way of putting it. So one way of thinking about the community attributes is to sort of go back to the IAD framework, where attributes are attributes of community, and I'll share this so that we can, we can all have a, hang on a second, it's going back to the presentation. So in the IAD framework, community attributes are listed as an external variable, which is one way of thinking about it. And I think in some ways, to the extent that community attributes are given to a particular snapshot of situation, it does become an external variable. But here, right? So attributes of community is an external variable, which is useful. But when I talk about interlinked action arenas are part of the action situation here. That I think is an attempt to endogenize power, the workings of power, not just sort of power as a monolithic variable, but workings of power, which can be more complicated than sort of thinking about the three phases of power. Right? I mean, three phases of power are anyway complicated enough, but all I mean to say is that it sort of opens up the whole analytics of thinking about the workings of power within action situations. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I just to follow up, I've been thinking about this lately, and if we want to understand how power operates, we need to decompose the variables that give rise to power relations. That is, we need to understand power itself as an outcome of earlier action situations.
Yeah, of course.
And so that's why I'm thinking about, I understand that you're trying to endogenize it to the model through these linked, not linked action or situations, but something slightly different from what Mike had in mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of making it, I'm thinking about power as a function of the distribution of assets within a community, the distribution of positions to which power attaches within a community. And we all know that actors enter the action situation with all their assets, with their positions, in their positions, and with the power relations as they are. And sometimes the power relations block access to an action situation for certain people, right? And so we need to, that's why I think it's got to be really in the framework.
Right. Yeah, right. No, I agree. And I think we, for example, when we talk about, local inequalities that affect the way in which people make decisions, right? I would say it's going even deeper, right? Sort of, you're just getting right to the core of bounded rationality. And again, I think, and Pranita is here and she can add more on this, but caste affects the distribution of endowments, exactly the same point. But I think what we have added in this discussion is that these are not just sort of immediate distributions, but there are also historical legacies, right? And structural legacies, which comes from the larger structures. But you're right. I mean, so I think, what needs to be done, and somebody must have done this already, which you're suggesting, is to sort of also use the classical workshop methods of getting at it, right? I think, yeah, absolutely. That's really, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Maybe just a quick note, I got your comments in the chat that people trying to sign up for the working group, which is great, thank you. But obviously you are denied access.
That must be the Google Doc link, it always does something. So we'll
got
fix
that
it.
point, so we will work that out. Please keep trying. I think that should be just a technical problem. That was no real reason behind excluding selected persons out of this group. No power aspects involved, just technique. Yeah, Liana, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I would love to have that PPT. You've curated a very nice reading list for me. So if you could share the PPT, it'd be really good. I've been trying to deal with how to integrate the IID with different power structures. And one problem I keep running into is most definitions of power, justice, and inequality are structural in nature, but the epistemological underpinnings of IID are very different from those from the school of thought in which we discuss power, inequality, and justice. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's really, in a sense, that's one important piece of what we've been trying to do, which is that to think about local relationships as being driven by more than the sort of rational calculation of the situation. So workshops, and again, I think that's why I kept sort of, focusing on this notion of bounded rationality, that we are very strongly rooted in this notion of bounded rationality. But I think that the development of bounded rationality on the front of inequalities and ways in which inequality and power in differences actually constrain individuals in making different kinds of decisions and prevents their autonomy. That's where we bring in the structural power. So if you're a lower caste person, and if you're the leader of the forest community group is an upper caste person, even when and this is, I show that this in the article that I cited in the Journal of Theoretical Politics, and again, Pranita and Tom's paper talks about this, that you cannot oppose an unjust rule because you're thinking about and you're bound by the inequalities of the caste structure, right? So that structure comes right into your local action situation. So that's one way in which we have sort of thought about this. The other thing is to sort of look at the power matrix that I showed, and that really is a, I think we spent a lot of time, and I'm so glad we did, on developing that particular tool, which again sort of connects the macro power over, power institutions such as World Bank. They go and implement joint forest management programs in local communities, and they become part of the sort of local institutional structure in a sense. And, in many, many situations, we have seen that because it's a external project funded by a big agency, communities just have to say, yes, sir, right? And so these are the ways in which we bring the structure in, and we have tried to sort of theorize it in a variety of different ways. And yeah, I'd definitely love to continue these discussions.
Thank you.
Prakash, I am also wondering, and I see your hand up, Brian, you are with us in a minute. You talked a lot now about these structural outside constraints. We also in the past digged a bit about in this leader capabilities and the idea when a good leader turns into a bad one, and what are the qualities and really his or her asset to do that. Would you consider this then more power from inside, and will that have different criteria to maybe be posed inside the IID framework right away as an actor characteristics, whereas what you just described is how we include the structural relationship coming from outside?
Right. I mean, so that's so there are two different points here. The outside-inside binary is bridging the outside-inside binary is what institutions are about, right? So institutions are the bridge between the structure and the agency of the individual. They connect individuals to what they can't do or can do, given the collective choice and constitutional choice rules, right? So that's, I think this vocabulary of outside, inside, may be a bit limiting in some ways, but leaders definitely are a perfect example of the kind of role that they play in orchestrating, right? So orchestration is a phrase that governance scholars have been using recently in a very interesting way. And I think leaders orchestrate collective action in many, many ways. And something that you highlight in your work, that they have the ability to either prevent collective action if the collective action will take away from their interest, or to promote particular kinds of collective action that, as I've shown in my work too, which will work in their favor. And many community members may either not benefit, or in many cases may even lose out in the process. But they will not speak up because leaders are the conduits of resources, power, authority, and so forth. So again, I would think of leaders as being the connectors between the external world and the inside world. And they are sort of and I think I'll keep it short, but thinking about positions assigned, right? So leaders have a leadership role within local collective actions. So thinking about position is important, but it's not just the position that position of the leader of the local collective action that the leader is drawing upon. They're also drawing on their social and political power, their ability to draw on economic structures, social structures. And so that's what we've been sort of highlighting, right? So their ability to draw on these multiple endowments of power, resources, authority should not be separated out, is the argument that some of us have been making. But of course, that need to be shown in an empirically stronger way, and I think that's why I like the CAST paper that Pranita and Tom wrote, because that's sort of, it's a great empirical example of how this unfolds within the IAD kind of analysis.
Wow, yeah, that's, I would almost like to continue now, but I think now it's Brian's turn. Go ahead, please.
Okay, well, this may go along some of the same lines and give you a chance to talk more, but interested in a sense if you can say more about in your power matrix, the kind of power two, the crafting institutions, and the part of co-optation that's bottom-up power and agency to, reshape things in favor of local communities and interests, and particularly how you think about power in that context in terms of the classic institutional design questions of, how do you control rulers? Faustian bargain, you give somebody power, they may abuse power. How do you control that? Checks and balances, all that kind of discussion. How, do you see ways in which your perspective on power fits with those questions that Vincent and Lynn and others have been concerned with? Thank you.
Sure, that's a great question, Brian. And let me share the power matrix again, just to make this discussion quite concrete. And I think this is where we also see how sort of going beyond the classical workshop methods of thinking about rules, positions, and all of that, which is part of all of this. But sometimes I think that classical methods may need to be augmented by some of the other kinds of analysis that come from other types of scholarships, as Lavanya was hinting at. And so if we look at the power matrix, what we have done here is that we have taken the sort of three phases of power, even though we have a bit of a critical discussion of the three phases. So on the top, you see overt power, which is the sort of real crass power of the resources and so forth, the agenda power, and the third phase of power, which is the discursive or ideational power. And what we have done is that we matched that with sort of multi-scale notion of workings of political economy that we borrow from workshop classical scholarship. And there, co-optation is productive in that sense. It's sort of Foucauldian, draws on some of the Foucauldian scholarship, Arun's work and so forth, which is that, powerful actors, and again, I'll single out World Bank because World Bank economists themselves came out with a study in 2012 where they showed that most of the participatory programs that World Bank supported were actually elite captured. And so that's a classical example of how top-down power is wielded, but not the power of the stick, right? So World Bank comes up with a participatory program. They're drawing on the discourses of participation. They're drawing on the discourses of bottom-up action and so forth. And they are, putting in place local committees such as the, community-based committees in Africa or joint forest management programs in India and those kinds of things, right? So it's really going beyond the notion of participation in institutions, but to ask this question of what are these tools being subjected to and who's got say in designing those institutions so that they work in a particular way. Every institution can work in 20 different ways and can be sort of, can be wrapped in narratives and discourses of different types. And going back to Florent's work and Inza's early work, I think that's why thinking about the narratives and discourses, which is not typically done by workshop scholars, is increasingly important. And similarly, when we think about crafting institutions, we see that in close connection with the role of social movements that Gustavo and Sergio have been working on, where you create a political discussion about what the institutions should be about, right? So joint forest management was, and it's, we also are fortunate in the sense that we have lived through this entire generation of participatory programs that came up and withered away. And then it's really a good time to actually ask ourselves, what are the kind of questions that could have been asked when joint forest management was being celebrated? And I did that working paper right in 2006 or 7, where we were grappling with the same kinds of questions about how some of these participatory institutions can be co-opted and captured by different kinds of interest groups. So I think the main response here is to sort of bring in the social science theories of power while building on the strong sort of empirical tools that we've been using as part of our workshop toolbox in a sense.
If I can follow up briefly, leading question, are you saying the only story is elite capture, or are
when
there
did I say
variations
that? No,
in
Brian.
the degree of elite capture? Are there
no, I didn't say that. Not
some
less.
successes?
No, I didn't say that.
No, but it sounds like it when you emphasize
it doesn't.
elite capture as the only outcome.
It emphasized because that has been the large scale outcomes of thousands of World Bank projects that were studied, thousands of JFM projects that have been studied. There are successful community-based projects, but they have needed a constant social mobilization. So we're not just talking about going out there, consultants going and designing rules or discovering rules, but working on developing social powers that will make sure that decentralization is not re-centralized. I can cite 20 studies, large-scale multi-case study research by N. Larson, Arun Agrawal, Jesse Ribot, Prakash Kashwan, Ashwini Chatre, where we've all discovered how potential benefits can wither away over time. And that's what I'm sort of pointing out. So I don't think we should sort of, I mean, we have short time, so let's keep moving forward.
Sheila, hi, nice to see you. Go ahead, please.
Yes, hi, Prakash, brilliant as usual. I wanted to pick your brain and ask you about how you situate the role of the state. I mean, you talk about kind of multinational institutions and both private, I guess, and public, ish, like the World Bank, and you talk about kind of power being given to groups, marginalized groups, to bring them into decision-making processes. So that's one role, but there's kind of a deeper role of the state, I think, if you think about structural inequality in the US, for instance, and the state was very much involved in creating that inequality. And you might think that the state should have a role, not just a procedural role, but a distributive, a substantive role in doing so. So how does the idea of the state fit into your power analysis?
Right. I think state is another important variable that got left out of quite a bit of workshop scholarship, because the context within which Lynn Ostrom's work built up, in sort of the tragedy of the commons, where state and market players were the only game in town. And so there was this strong reason to sort of emphasize that communities are also important. But then once we, get back into working on the ground, we know that state is everywhere. It's that, there's this argument of state being seen as a disaggregated unity, right? So it's a strange beast that is everywhere. It's not monolithic state, but especially in the global South and inner city areas and in most of the urban areas, state plays a strong role because it has the regulatory power, it has the agenda setting power, it has the power to enact laws and so forth. And state was, of course, present in the notion of nested enterprises. That was, one of the important design principles, but again, one of the lesser studied design principles. So, that is to say that the more critical, the more valuable, the more scarce a resource gets, the more there is the need to sort of bring the state into our analytics and to sort of focus on the varied ways in which communities can engage with the state and can make the local state work in their favor, right? And so it's not just, again, I think some of the urban housing work that we've cited in the article, Reimagining the Commons, shows that you have these local laws that allows housing trust and land trust and those kinds of instruments to come into existence and to be of aid to community groups that are coming from a position of great deal of disempowerment and disenfranchisement and dispossession over long periods of time. And so the community action is also an action to lay claim on the resources and power of the state. And so that's where I think there are a variety of ways in which state shows up in commons, especially in urban commons. And of course, we've learned a lot from your work, so we'll continue to do that.
I would just add to that analysis, that was great, is an overlay of property rights. So often get into the built environment, the state actually is the owner of the resources. So it's not, and so for me, that's how, when you look at these contextual areas, where the state has a different relationship to the resource itself as a matter of property than in a kind of tragedy situation, right? Which is a kind of pre-political, setting with the state. So anyway, but yeah, so that's just a small addendum.
Yeah, thank you for that reminder, because especially in my work on forest, 95% of the forest in Africa and Asia are owned by the state. And right, yeah, so thanks for that.
Yeah, Pranita, your hand is up next.
Thank you, Insa. Hi, Prakash, good to see you, and thank you for such an insightful talk. So in my own research, I think I've been studying how less powerful actors react when entrenched in the system of domination. So I was just wondering about your thoughts, especially with the matrix, about how would the matrix help us also analyze how more powerful actors react when less powerful actors start crafting institutions or with the cooperation. Like how could we bridge those things together with less powerful actors becoming more assertive?
Right, and I mean, on the one
maybe you can answer to that, and then I would like to leave 3-4 minutes that we can come back to the idea of the working group.
Right, yeah, right. So the powerful actors, and again, Pranita, thanks for your work and this wonderful question. Of course, lots of debates and discussions, but I want to actually sort of piggyback on your question in a sense that we always think about collective action and sort of, rule making and all of that, but there's also a lot of violence in the context of commons. And so what we have seen in response to the water protectors and the indigenous nations movements here in the US and everywhere is that, especially here in the US, the states have come back with laws that outlaw dissent. They criminalize dissent. And so, you know, there are these wall turners who've been in jail, and, you know, of course, you know, environmental defenders throughout the world. And so they are actually paying the cost of resistance against the land grab and the commons grab. And again, you know, I think that is another piece of important workshop scholarship that I failed to mention earlier, this notion of resource grab and green grab and commons grab. And so I think that's where, you know, we don't have a choice but to sort of look into those kinds of difficult aspects of the common struggles, in a sense, right? Of course, there are also the powerful actors also co-opt. They also create rules, offers that you cannot refuse as a local community, right? Those kinds of situations, to think of the Godfather analogy there. So powerful actors react in a variety of ways. They try to gaslight, they try to create you know, negative reactions, and to criminalize, and to put communities in a situation where they can be criminalized easily. And so I think there are a lot of these difficult questions that come up, and that's why the role of social movements becomes even more important as part of the commons discussions.
Thank you. So that were many highlights and many aspects we could tackle and discuss further. So it's great that we have this opportunity, and thanks for your initiative, Prakash, to come up with this idea of a working group on that. I think we lost Gustavo, but Sheila is also still here. So, and I saw now many people who put in the chat their willingness to join us. So Prakash, do you want to say just a few words, maybe how we understand this working group and how we will think of starting it, so that, and then we will make sure to save the chat so that we can put your email address in the listserv. In case we forget somebody, maybe check back in 3 days from now and sign in individually. Yeah.
Right, so the Google form that we have, it's a sign up form, but we are also inviting your suggestions on what should be points of discussions going forward. We already had some, you know, some of this discussion here. Dan's suggestion of, you know, sort of grappling empirically with, you know, the positions, powers, resources, and so forth. That's already a project right there, you know, in different sort of empirical contexts that we need to take up. We've been thinking for quite a long time to sort of continue working on the power matrix, to broaden it and to highlight the bottom part of the power matrix, because power matrix, and then part of this is to do with the narratives and so forth, where, you know, power is seen as a negative thing, right? But power is also productive, not just in Foucauldian sense, but also in a social movement sense. So yeah, all I will say, and I'll let Inza and Sheila add further to this, but to say that we are actually really creating a community. And I will keep doing what I do, and, you know, Inza will keep doing what Inza does, and we'll have Sheila's leadership and ideas, and we invite all of you to join and create subgroups and create projects and you know, workshop panels and conference panels and so forth.
Sheila, do you want to add something to that? Some thoughts?
Well said. I think a lot of what we've talked about today is a wonderful preview of the potential of the work group. So I think if you're intrigued by all of the strands, I think that Prakash pulled out on this, that illustrates the potential richness of this work group and what its outputs could be. I think that's open for debate, but like, we collaborated on this piece that Prakash referenced in his talk, and I thought that was really enriching to have an interdisciplinary thinking about inequality in the common. So that's the kind of potential of this work group, I think.
Sheila, I like your work potential very much. I think that's exactly what we have in mind, because we have no concrete plan except that we want to meet and kick it off with some kind of event. So we will really take it from your input and see how it develops. So the plan for now is to open up a platform, and then we see what our participants would like to do. And I should better be quiet as we have so much background noise again in front of our building. So Prakash, I know that you need to run somewhere. So you offered on a more individual basis, or maybe in our next working group meeting, you will be available for ongoing debates, or because today we cannot add this usually half an hour. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, I think we will have an opening meeting of the working group in near future, so we can get into other kinds of discussions. And it would have been actually great to stay around and chat, but I have an editorial meeting that started right now at 1 o'clock. So I took a lease of about 5 minutes, but yeah, please join us. We'll fix the Google link, and we'll also send out other announcements via the polycentricity newsletter and polycentric circles newsletter and other kinds of listservs and so forth. And of course, we are all connected via the workshop infrastructure of larger list of the workshop community.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Prakash, again, also for your quick response to jump into this colloquium. Thanks very much.
Of course, and this was a perfect opportunity to kickstart the working group. So
yeah.
Oh, it sure was. And thank you, Inza, for the terrific job moderating. And please do, if you can, join us for on Wednesday when we welcome Salih to the research series. I'm very excited for the prospects of this working group too. So thanks so much, everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you for being with us.